Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Peppis, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. My guest today is Robert Guldberg, Vice President, and Robert and Leona DeArmond, Executive Director of the Phil and Penny Knight Campus for Accelerating Scientific Impact at the University of Oregon. Prior to joining the Knight Campus in August 2018, Guldberg was at Georgia Tech, where he served as Executive Director of the Parker H. Pettit Institute for Bioengineering and Bioscience, and was a professor at the George W. Woodruff School of Mechanical Engineering and the School of Biomedical Engineering. Guldberg's work in regenerative medicine has led to his collaboration with medical scientists at the Center for Regenerative Medicine at the Oregon Health and Science University in Portland. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
First, tell us about your background. How did you wind up becoming a bioengineer?
Yeah, a little bit of chance. I was at the University of Michigan studying mechanical engineering, trying to decide whether to go to med school, and ended up in an orthopedic research lab, just sort of exploring things, and kind of fell in love with science at that point. Continued on in grad school. Bioengineering as a field didn't exist back then, so I continued on mechanical engineering, but was applying it in the medical field, and ended up getting my PhD there. Moved on to a postdoc in molecular biology, and that sort of led to my career path.
So tell us about regenerative medicine. What is that?
Yeah, regenerative medicine is something that was really just launching as I was a graduate student. And it was, what really appealed to me was it was something where we could take our interests in engineering and biology and combine them into something that could benefit patients. And the idea basically is, in our aging population and even in pediatric patients, putting in implants that are going to have a limited lifetime is an imperfect solution. It would be much better if we had biological solutions that would integrate and adapt with our bodies, and that's the idea. Using biomaterials that resorb over time, using cells, using biologic factors that we learn from biology as cues to regenerate tissues like bone and cartilage and muscle.
So you're talking about things that start on the molecular level, but ultimately the goal is to impact the lives of patients. Right. So talk a little bit about that scaling up process.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll take biomaterials for example. A piece of plastic, as you can imagine, is pretty inert. It doesn't do a lot. But by understanding the biology at the molecular level, we can engineer the surface of that material to interact with the body in very specific ways and actually encourage integration, or encourage a particular type of tissue to form, or encourage a particular immune response. And by understanding that molecular level, that leads to a response that at the functional level may allow a patient to return to walking around without pain, or to have the function of a tissue or joint that they wouldn't normally have had.
Fascinating. So tell us about some of the innovations that you've patented over the years.
Yeah, I've patented a range of things. Some of the things that we've patented are sort of at the development of the tissues, something called bioreactors. So we basically, it's a device where you can grow a tissue outside the body that you can either use as a model to understand what's happening in the patient, or potentially even to grow and manufacture a tissue that would be implanted into a patient. So we've patented bioreactors. We've also patented certain innovative biomaterials that integrate better with the body. One example of that from last year was a material that's being used to fuse spines in the back. So patients, mostly older patients, but also pediatric patients sometimes that have diseases, have degenerative back diseases where they have incredible pain, in that soft tissue that's in between the vertebra. And we'd love to be able to have actually a regenerative medicine solution where you regrew that intervertebral disc. We're not there yet, and so what doctors tend to do is to fuse the two adjacent vertebrae, which relieves the pain for the patient. And the technologies for that are imperfect. They fail, roughly 20% of the time. And what we developed was a new material that it basically grows a porous interface into the surface of the material, and because of that, the blood wicks in and the bone grows in very, very quickly. We were able to commercialize that and clear 2 products through the FDA, and then that was purchased by a large medical device manufacturer last year.
That's fascinating. So you've come to the University of Oregon in this summer, the end of the summer.
August.
Is your lab up and running? And if it is, where is it? I don't even know where it is on the campus.
It's not in the hole in ground over on
yes,
Franklin
I know.
Boulevard.
The Knight campus is not there yet. So.
Right. So we renovated space in Pacific Hall. I'm really thankful that we were able to do that. I had a fairly large lab at Georgia Tech, And so some of those students have graduated, some of them are still at Georgia Tech, so I'm still running a lab there while starting a lab here. So we're in Pacific Hall on the second floor, and we'll be there until the night campus building opens in early 2020.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the night campus. First, what are some of the facilities that are being imagined for the campus?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I'm just incredibly grateful because although I'm coming in at the beginning of this project, it's not starting from scratch. There was, you know, incredible faculty leadership, incredible administrative leadership that have gotten this project off the ground, have designed an absolutely spectacular building. And they didn't do it just designing it here. They actually went around the country, visited places, including my institute at Georgia Tech, and looked at how different people had done this, took the best of all of those, and designed really a forward-looking building for the University of Oregon. So you know, some of the features are it's got very open lab space, so that the faculty there won't have closed-off labs where they're not, you know, directly interfacing with other laboratories. There's a lot of space for people to get together and work together in spaces, including students. A lot of the office space is designed so the students and the faculty will be right next to each other and be able to work side by side, as well as with companies that come in. I'm very excited about the innovation space, so there's going to be a space where startup companies can come in. They'll have a war room where they can go in and, you know, private and do planning, but then also open space for people to come in, including faculty who have other jobs, but can come in with their students or others in the company, work for a few hours there, and then go back to their regular jobs. And there'll be business operations right there because, you know, part of the problem with getting companies off the ground is figuring out the business side of that. And so there'll be support for that right in the building.
Are there collaborations with the RAIN, the incubator that the University of Oregon is involved with?
I certainly anticipate that there will be. You know, all those things it's early days, all those things are still to come.
So you've already sort of started to answer my next question, but let me ask it more directly. What attracted you to this position? Why'd you want to come?
Yeah, it was a great question. So I ran something at Georgia Tech, an institute that in some ways is where we want to go. And so you might say, well, why did I come here to sort of restart that? And part of the answer for that is that when I took over the institute at Georgia Tech, it was about 12 years into its beginning. And I took it and basically tripled it in size. And then by the end, it was 6 buildings, and it was an incredibly dynamic place. There were 19 research centers built into the institute, 240 faculty that belonged to the institute. But I didn't start it. I basically took it over. I wasn't the founder of it. I didn't have the opportunity to set the vision from the very beginning. And that's the opportunity here. So that's what I was really excited about. I'm also very excited that, you know, I came from a technological university, one of the best in the world. Georgia Tech is top 10 in engineering in every class of engineering. But they don't have some things as well. They don't have humanities. They don't have a law school. So some of those elements I was really excited about because I do think as we think about training the next generation of scientists, we want to make them more well-rounded. Part of that is understanding early on the business aspects. We know that doing technology and then thinking about how to translate it later doesn't work. It's also not a good idea to do the technology and not think about the ethical considerations and so forth as you're going along. And so the opportunity to create something where there's an integration of all those things as we train the next generation of scientists was very exciting to me.
Can I ask you a couple of follow-ups about that?
Sure.
So the first one is, you know, do you have a sense of the kind of industries and corporations that might be interested in collaborating with the night campus?
Yeah, I think any of the companies in the biotechnology space, we're very interested in looking at the interface between the molecular and the biology and the engineering, but also starting to get into the data informatics part of this. As I think about the field, there are many, I call them language barriers that we've overcome. Engineers have learned how to talk to scientists. Both have learned how to talk to clinicians who really drive the needs for this. The next language barrier we need to overcome really is with the data informatics people. And it's a challenging one, both because, as oftentimes happens, they speak different languages, but also because we're in an era where everybody has recognized the need for this, and we're effectively, competing for talent with the Googles and the Microsofts and every other university across the world. And so that's an area where I'm really thankful that we have both the data science initiative and the night campus. They are separate, but they're going to overlap and work together. And we're also probably going to do some things with Oregon Health Sciences University as a way of creating something that's unique that will attract that talent.
Tell us a little bit about the collaborations that have already started to happen between U of O and OHSU.
Yeah, so the first visit after I committed to this position, which was last October, a year ago October, was to Portland, was to meet with people at Oregon Health Sciences University. And in part, that's because I have several friends there, I knew people there. In part, it was because I knew that relationship would be critical to what we're doing here. One of the things we don't have, of course, is a medical school. I'm a biomedical engineer. I can anticipate starting engineering at the University of Oregon for the first time, but I can't start a medical school. And so having that relationship was very important. I very quickly developed an adjunct relationship there. I have an adjunct appointment, both in their Center for Regenerative Medicine as well as in their biomedical engineering department. And of course, they have the Night Cancer Institute. And so there's some obvious and appropriate interactions that will happen between the Night Cancer Institute and the Night Campus. And data science is probably going to be one of those areas. We just spent the day up in Portland last week talking about that. Brian Drucker, the head of the Night Cancer Institute, was there for the whole day. I was there for the whole day. And we've realized that working together is probably the best way for us to move forward with that. We're also anticipating and talking about doing some joint educational programs. And so one of the things I think there's great potential for is a joint graduate program between OHSU, University of Oregon, potentially even Oregon State University, with the idea being that working together we can create a stronger partnership and compete nationally with all the other universities that are already doing this. It's a very popular degree among students. And I found at Georgia Tech, which also doesn't have a medical school, the partnership with Emory University created something that was very attractive to bring in great students.
So tell us a little bit more about your vision for the experience and the participation of students in the night campus, undergrads, grads.
Yes, we've already launched a pilot program for undergraduate research. This is something we just announced and we'll be getting off the ground in January. The idea there is to involve undergraduates not just in a summer rotational program, which is fairly common, but something that would be a full year-long experience. It'll be a competitive program, so it'll be based on the merits of the undergraduate students. They will be linked with a graduate student or a postdoc for mentorship training. That's also giving the graduate students training, which is very important. And I've also found, this is a program I've run before, I've also found it works very well for the faculty because they get good graduate students and they're committed to enough time that they actually make a difference. And so I always tell the undergraduates that come into that I fully expect them to earn their way onto a paper for authorship. This is not they're going to be handed a protocol and done it. So that's one area where we'll certainly have an impact. I'm very passionate about that because that's how I got my start in the field, and so we'll be providing undergraduate research opportunities. I also think there'll be some graduate programs and undergraduate programs that come out of the night campus that will be more on the applied side, applied science and engineering, but those are still in the works.
Can you give us an update about the construction? How's the project going?
Yeah, the good news is it's on track.
Not always the case.
Not always the case, and the good thing about a good economy is that people are doing well. The bad thing is it's really hard to get contractors to come in and get bids in place. So I'm really thankful for the group at Georgia Tech that has been Georgia Tech at University of Oregon that has been helping us with this. And we're on track for opening the building in early 2020. And so I think everything looks great. You can see, I'm actually in the office building right next to the hole in the ground, so I can see the elevator shafts going up. There's a lot of rebar in there. If we ever do get the earthquake, everyone's going to want to be in that building, I think. It's going to be a very stable building.
Yes, and there's a webcam. You can actually watch the construction happening.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about the boards that are involved with the night campus. There's the faculty board. Is there an external board? What's the concept there?
Yeah, there's an internal advisory board that was formed before I even arrived that has representation from across the university. And that group is basically the de facto faculty of the Knight campus until we recruit in faculty. So they've been instrumental in setting up some of the governance policies and some of the other programs that are in place now. There also is an external advisory board. So I did two things in the spring before I even arrived here. I formed an external advisory board, which is made up of experts from around the country. I focused honestly primarily on entrepreneurs and people who had started or run interdisciplinary educational programs like we anticipate for the Knight campus. And so we have some absolutely terrific people. I was really happy with the experts we were able to assemble. We've already had that first meeting that happened this fall. And then also in the spring I started a strategic planning process. And the idea behind that was really that I didn't want to come in and say, okay, I do regenerative medicine, so that's what the campus is going to do. We really wanted to gather input from the community, both in the University of Oregon community primarily, but also our statewide partners, and try to understand how do we synergize with the strengths that are here to sort of complete that innovation cycle. And the idea is, obviously, University of Oregon's known for outstanding science, humanities, law school, business school, but how do we add in the tool builders, the engineers, the applied scientists that really help to complete that cycle?
So you've already started to mention that there are going to be faculty. I think you're doing the first round of hiring for faculty in the Knight campus. Tell us about those positions. What kind of scholars and scientists will they be?
Yeah, we have two faculty searches going on right now. The one that's furthest ahead is what we call an open rank search, which means that any seniority can apply to that position. We also listed about 4 or 5 different areas because the strategic planning process is not complete. And so we picked some areas of obvious interest, but didn't want to focus down too narrowly. So that was a challenge for the search committee because they had to review applications from a wide range of backgrounds. Really happy that we got 240 applications for those positions. And we're down to 5 finalists, and I'm very excited about the finalists we have. We'll probably make, I would guess, 2 hires out of that search. And then the second search is in the neuroengineering space, and that is for a senior person. And that came about because there was a donor that came in that was very interested in the neurosciences as well as the Knight campus. And we sort of combined those two and said, well, let's hire a senior neuroengineer, which is you've probably heard of the brain mapping initiative, for example, the people that are coming up with the technologies to map the functions of the brain. That would be a good example. People that are doing human brain interfaces, that would be another example of sort of a neuroengineer. And that sort of person will really very nicely link the Knight campus with the existing strengths on campus in neuroscience.
So let's talk a little bit about that part of it. Tell us a little more about how you're understanding the links that will exist between the Knight campus and other parts of the university, other disciplines in the university.
Yeah, it's still developing. Obviously with the sciences, there's clear links. There will be faculty in the science departments that will want to affiliate with the Knight campus that are maybe a little more on the applied side, or perhaps not. They may be doing fundamental science, but they want to collaborate with someone that's more on the applied side. And that's certainly great as well. So there'll be programs that sort of facilitate those. I sort of think about a lot about chemical reactions being the collision of molecules. I think the Knight campus will help to provide collisions of people and then to catalyze those collisions and so that we get a product that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Do you guys have a sense of the kind of economic impact the Knight campus might have on the state of Oregon's economy?
Yeah, I think those are difficult projections to have, but I've always been, through my whole career, I've always worked with companies, and so we will be putting in place programs that will facilitate companies to come in and work with the University of Oregon. In a sense, I think of the Knight campus as being a portal that the companies will be able to interface with easily and connect them with the expertise on campus. That's not something the university has done a whole lot of before. I think it's very important for a few reasons. One is, as federal support and state support for science goes down or stays flat, the places that work well with companies are going to be the ones that thrive. I think there's a little bit of a misconception that there's not good science going on in industry. That's actually not true. A lot of times they're actually better resourced than we are in academia. And so I think that's important. It also creates opportunities for our students for jobs, and that's something we need to be really cognizant of, is creating those relationships that allow the students to move into positions. And frankly, a lot of times if you talk to the companies, that's why they want to work with universities. Us faculty think that it's because of us, but it's really the students that they want access to because they're looking for great talent. It also brings some challenges. You have to think about, you know, conflict of interest issues and making sure that the companies are not driving the academic agenda. And so those are things that I have a lot of experience with, and I'll be helping the University of Oregon deal with.
I know that occasionally when applied scientists create an amazing patent or start a new company, it sometimes takes them out of the academy. You know, I'm aware of some scientists who were once here who are now running businesses.
Yep.
Is this a concern that a kind of real success in this kind of collaboration is going to lead to a kind of depletion of our faculty? Is that a worry? I mean, for people that do the kind of work you do, is that a phenomenon that happens, or am I making that up?
It happens. It doesn't happen very often for a few reasons. One is that faculty have gone into academia for a reason, and you know they generally enjoy that environment. They didn't go into industry. If they'd really wanted high salaries and so forth, they would have gone into industry to start with. So a lot of times faculty are not interested in that. Another factor is that faculty generally are not great business people.
Yes, I'm aware.
I have direct experience with that. My first company I started many years ago, I think 25 years ago, myself and two of my colleagues tried to run it ourselves, and we did okay. You know, it didn't fail miserably, but we missed all kinds of business opportunities because we weren't business people. And so my strategy that I really like now is I like to have the students coming up have opportunities to learn about entrepreneurship and the business side as they're doing the science. I'm actually leaving tomorrow to go up to Vancouver for something called the Creative Destruction Lab, which is all about that. It's bringing together students from the business school, law school, and sciences to work together on business plans and bring in the judgment, the entrepreneurial judgment, to help mentor them through this. So I think the best model really is to look to the students. And for the students that have that inclination and are good at it, a lot of times they can go off and do the business, and the faculty can serve as an advisor and play a minor role. That's what I've done since that first sort of failed experiment, and it's worked quite well.
So you've just talked about potential collaborations with law school, business school.
Yep.
I'm the director of the Oregon Humanities Center, so I'm particularly interested in the question of, will there be collaborations? Can you imagine collaborations with the humanities? Will there be? Can you imagine any?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, as I said earlier, I think that's one of the reasons I came here. You know, very interested in that, and I think there's lots of different areas for partnerships. You know, certainly the arts and science is an important area. We will have an artist in residence program in the Knight campus, and that's something I actually had back at Georgia Tech as well, where we had art and science throughout the building. I think communication and ethics are two, you know, very important areas that are obvious areas of collaboration. Just in areas like artificial intelligence and gene editing and even regenerative medicine and stem cells and so forth, the ethical considerations are quite real. And so having our students, even, you know, at the educational stage, certainly, having them cognizant of those issues early on in the process of doing their science is really important.
So this week is Startup Week at the University of Oregon. Yep. I know that the Knight campus is participating in Startup Week. Can you say something about that participation?
Yeah, our role is we're going to do an innovation panel where 4 of us, including myself, will be at the front of the room and talking about our startup experiences and lessons learned, pitfalls to avoid. How do you manage conflict of interest? How do you get through the valley of death?
The Valley of Death?
Valley of Death,
What is the Valley of Death?
Valley of Death. So the Valley of Death is, you know, there's so much innovation going on in academia. And then you look at companies that have been successful, and this bridge between those 2 points is called the Valley of Death. And it's the point at which there's maybe a proof of concept in a laboratory for something that could be useful, but there's so many issues that haven't been worked out. You know, how do you finance that? How do you scale it up? How do you get it through regulatory bodies? How do you deal with, in our field, reimbursement issues? I've seen many medical technologies that work quite well, but they don't fit into the economics of our medical care system, and so they don't get reimbursed, and therefore that bridge is not going to happen. And so that there's a lot of things that die in that valley of death, and so you have to come up with mechanisms to help faculty through that, and in order to see the innovations actually impact patients.
I assume from that title that most of the companies that come through do not survive the valley of death.
That's correct.
Do you know what the percentage is? I'm just curious.
I don't know, exact percentage.
It's the majority, though.
It's the majority, particularly early on. There's a thesis that there's a lot of innovation going on in the world, and the reason you see so much of it succeed in focused areas like the Bay Area and in Boston is because there are people in those areas that have experience doing it before. And that's one of the reasons I think it's really important that we give our students entrepreneurial experiences. Are they likely to be successful? Maybe not the first time, but they'll learn something, and so maybe their second time or third time or fourth time, it will be successful.
So, you've already talked about a number of things, but we have never at the University of Oregon really had a lot of industry and corporate partnerships. So tell us about what the university broadly is doing to sort of address that long-standing gap.
Well, again, I think it's bringing in people that have done this before.
Yeah.
And so someone like myself and some of the faculty that we bring in will have had interactions with industry before. Part of it is bringing in people on our advisory boards that are from companies and can help to facilitate those sorts of collaborations. Part of it is recognizing some of the funding opportunities. A lot of our federal funding opportunities now actually are private-public partnerships, the big ones. And so you have to have commitments from industry and expressed interest from industry before the federal government will make their investment. And so that's one of the drivers as well. And so we'll be creating, as I said, the Knight campus can be a portal where we'll basically be communicating. We've hired some people in our advancement office that have some experience with working with companies. And so I think all those things will change over time. It's a cultural change. It's going to take some time. It's not going to be immediate. But I saw this at Georgia Tech as well. When I went there 23 years ago, there were very few faculty that were doing startups. There wasn't a lot of industry interactions. And now Georgia Tech has this situation where they have companies coming and setting up innovation centers around the periphery of the university so that they can have access to the technologies and the faculty and the students within the university. I don't necessarily see that Eugene's going to become Atlanta. I actually hope it doesn't. But I do think Eugene has a lot of potential. It's in this innovation corridor. You've got Seattle and Portland and San Francisco where companies are going, but their employees can't really afford to live. And so I do think there's a lot of potential for at least smart growth in the Eugene area and having some companies here that want to work with the university.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today about the Knight campus. It's been a real pleasure. Good luck with the whole project. It seems daunting and massive to me, but you've given us good confidence that you will succeed.
Great. Thank you, Paul.
You're very welcome. I've been speaking with Robert Guldberg, Vice President, and Robert and Leona DeArmond, Executive Director of the Phil and Penny Knight Campus for Accelerating Scientific Impact at the University of Oregon. Thanks so much for watching.